My phone didn't just ring, it erupted a betrayal. I was in Boston, 2,800 miles away, in a convention hall, smelling of burnt espresso. This was a career-defining conference. Then the notification blazed. Not a call from Dad. An alert from a police towing service in Hilton Head, South Carolina. My white Range Rover, secured in my Miami garage, explicitly forbidden, had been impounded 320 miles away. The line wasn't just crossed, it was obliterated. I stared at the screen. No shock, just a frigid, precise understanding. This wasn't an error. It was a declaration of combat. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Since we are stepping into 2026, I want to wish everyone a powerful new year. Let's make this the year we finally put ourselves first. And if you enjoy these stories, please support the channel so we can keep growing this community together. I stepped out of the convention hall into the corridor, the drone of the panel discussion fading behind the glass doors. My hand was calm as I brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was efficient, disconnected. The voice of a woman who had witnessed everything. Sergeant Davis explained the situation with surgical accuracy. My Range Rover had been obstructing a private beach access on Hilton Head for 7 hours. When the property owners reported it, the people returning to the vehicle, a man and a woman in their 50s, accompanied by a younger man, had disputed with the impound operator. They claimed it was a shared car. They claimed they had authorization. They claimed it was all a confusion. That phrase lingered in the air between us. Shared car. It suggested collective ownership. It suggested that my $95,000 asset, the one I financed, the one I insured, the one I serviced, was somehow a community resource for them to exploit whenever they felt entitled to a coastal getaway. In the past, I would have freaked out. I would have asked if they were injured. I would have apologized to the sergeant and offered to settle the charge over the phone just to eliminate the problem. But standing there in that corridor, 2,800 miles from the humidity of the Carolina shore, I felt a mechanism engage. This wasn't an error. It was larceny wrapped in the presumption of kinship. I didn't ask if they were unharmed. I didn't ask for specifics. I simply said, "Sergeant, I am the sole owner of that vehicle. I am currently in Boston. I did not give anyone authorization to remove that car from my garage, let alone across state boundaries. If they are in possession of the keys, they acquired them unlawfully." There was a pause on the line. The shift in the sergeant's tone was instantaneous. She wasn't talking to a confused daughter anymore. She was talking to a victim of grand theft auto. She asked if I wanted them apprehended. I told her I wanted my property protected. I authorized her to flag the vehicle immediately. 15 minutes later, my phone vibrated again with the update. They hadn't just been impounded, they had recovered the car from the towing facility using a duplicate key they weren't authorized to have, and attempted to return to Miami before I discovered. But they didn't make it far. Sergeant Davis informed me that a highway patrol unit had intercepted them on Interstate 95. My parents, Linda and Robert, along with my brother Derek, were removed from the vehicle. I closed my eyes and let the image construct itself in my mind. I pictured them standing on the shoulder of the interstate, the sun beating down on the pavement, surrounded by beach bags, towels, and sand-covered sandals. I pictured Derek, the favored son who had never experienced the word no in his existence, realizing that his manipulation didn't work on the South Carolina Highway Patrol. I pictured my mother's outrage, her conviction that she could negotiate her way out of anything, disintegrating as the tow hook descended for the second time that day. My phone began to eliminate. First Dad, then Mom, then Derek, then Dad again. The screen flashed relentlessly, a frantic Morse code of terror and fury. They were abandoned 230 miles from home, presumably with no method to return, their belongings dumped on the roadside like refuse. I didn't feel remorse. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt the cool, clean satisfaction of a balance sheet finally being corrected. I muted the phone, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and walked back into the convention hall. I had a keynote session to attend, and for the first time in years, I had absolutely nothing to be concerned about. Some people might think I was heartless for leaving my aging parents and my brother abandoned on the side of an interstate in the middle of a scorching day. They might think I overreacted to a simple family miscommunication. But those people don't know the history of the word no in my family. They don't understand that no isn't a boundary to my parents. It is a provocation, an offense they feel entitled to demolish. Before I left for Boston, I didn't just request them not to use my car. I explicitly stated the Range Rover was prohibited. I modified the code to my garage door. I took the backup key off the counter in the foyer and secured it in a fireproof vault in my study. I took these measures because I learned my lesson 3 years ago. That was when Derek, my cherished brother, decided to commandeer my previous car, a sedan I had just paid off, to drive to a music festival he couldn't afford admission for. He sideswiped a delivery truck while distracted. The damage totaled $6,340. When I presented the bill to my parents, my father told me making Derek pay would damage his confidence. He called it a growth opportunity. He said family doesn't invoice family. I ended up covering every cent of that deductible and the elevated insurance premiums, while Derek posted videos from the festival I had essentially subsidized. That was the day the Bank of Alexandria officially shuttered. Or so I thought. Sitting in that hotel room in Boston, staring at the ceiling, I realized I had been operating under a delusion for years. I had been trapped in the sunk cost fallacy of kinship. In economics, a sunk cost is capital that has already been expended and cannot be recovered. You're not supposed to factor it into future decisions, but human beings are irrational. We keep investing resources into failing ventures because we can't bear to abandon what we've already contributed. I had been paying a blood tax my entire adult life. I paid it in silence when they forgot my graduation but demanded elaborate celebrations for Derek. I paid it in cash when I covered crises they manufactured. I paid it in patience when they dismissed my career as a phase while worshiping Derek's intermittent, half-hearted attempts at employment. I kept paying because I thought if I invested enough, eventually I would get a dividend. I thought if I was dependable enough, accomplished enough, generous enough, they would eventually look at me and see a daughter instead of a resource. But as I replayed the timeline of this theft, locating the hidden key, circumventing the garage code, driving 350 miles to a beach resort, I finally accepted the truth. There is no return on investment with narcissists. They don't see generosity, they see vulnerability. They don't see forgiveness, they see authorization. My car wasn't borrowed, it was commandeered because they truly believed that anything I earned belonged to the collective, while anything Derek wanted belonged to him. The tax was no longer sustainable. I was done throwing good capital and good years after bad. I wasn't just recovering a car anymore, I was liquidating the account. I landed in Miami on a Thursday evening and took a rideshare straight to the impound facility. The woman behind the counter looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and indifference as I slid my credit card across the glass. The total came to $2,650. I signed the receipt without hesitation. Walking to my Range Rover, I felt a wave of nausea, not from the cost, but from the violation. It didn't look like my car anymore. There was a long, deep scratch running across the rear bumper, probably from a surfboard being dragged carelessly against the paint. Inside, the smell assaulted me instantly, a sickly sweet combination of coconut sunscreen, stale takeout, and wet towels. Sand was embedded into the carpet. A sticky residue covered the dashboard. My sanctuary, the one place where I had total authority, had been desecrated. I drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to witness their faces when I arrived in the vehicle they had stolen. I parked in the driveway and walked through the front door. They were all there in the den, Linda, Robert, and Derek. They looked depleted, their sunburns blistering, still wearing the clothes they had been abandoned in. A normal family would have been mortified. A normal parent would have rushed over to apologize, to offer to compensate for the damages, to beg for forgiveness. But I didn't grow up in a normal family. I grew up in a hierarchy, and I had just broken the chain of command. Linda stood up the moment I entered. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about the car. She pointed a finger at me, her face contorted in a fury I had rarely seen directed at anyone but strangers. She screamed that I was heartless. She screamed that I had humiliated them. She demanded how I could leave my own flesh and blood on the side of a highway like criminals. In that moment, I finally understood the mechanism of their cruelty. Psychologists call this a narcissistic injury. To a narcissist, a boundary isn't just a line you can't cross, it is an attack on their identity. By reporting the car stolen, I hadn't just inconvenienced them, I had shattered their delusion that they owned me. I had publicly demonstrated that I was a separate entity with legal rights, not an extension of their will. Their rage wasn't about the heat or the towing fees, it was about the loss of control. Robert chimed in, his voice booming with entitlement. He told me that everything I had, my career, my money, my car, was only possible because of them. He claimed I owed them for my success, that my assets were essentially family property because they had raised me. Derek sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up to mutter that I was being overdramatic and that it was just a car. They were rewriting reality in real time, painting me as the villain for reclaiming my own property. I realized then that there was no conversation to be had. You cannot negotiate with people who believe your autonomy is a personal insult. I didn't yell back. I didn't try to defend myself. I looked at the three of them, these strangers who shared my DNA, and realized the bank wasn't just closed, it was being demolished. Leaving wasn't an act of rage, it was an act of disposal. I walked out of that house with the silence of someone closing a business deal gone bad. They were still shouting as I reversed out of the driveway, their voices muffled by the soundproof glass of the Range Rover they had defiled. I drove home in silence. There were no tears this time. There was only the hum of the engine and the clarity of a decision already made. When I got to my house, I didn't collapse on the couch. I went straight to my study, woke up my laptop, and opened a spreadsheet. It was time to conduct an audit. For years, I had been the silent infrastructure of their lives, the safety net they didn't even know was there. I started with the recurring expenses. First, the premium subscriptions. Every month, premium packages and delivery services arrived at Derek's apartment, paid for by my accounts because he had once complained about how expensive living was. Click Cancel. Next, the auto repair shop. My credit card was on file as the backup payment method for the family vehicle, a card that had been charged 4 times in the last year for emergencies that were really just routine maintenance my parents couldn't afford. I called the shop and removed my authorization. Deleted. Finally, the joint savings account I had opened with my mother 4 years ago for true emergencies. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal account and closed it. The silence lasted exactly 36 hours. That's how long it took for the first declined transaction to hit. Then the smear campaign began. It started with a vague Instagram story from Derek about heartless people who value possessions over family. Then came the phone calls. My cousin called me worried because my mother had told me I was having a psychological crisis. She told the extended family I was unstable, paranoid, and lashing out at everyone who loved me. They were trying to control the narrative, painting me as the villain so they could remain the victims. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I looked at the three of them, these strangers who shared my DNA, and realized the bank wasn't just closed, it was being demolished. Leaving wasn't an act of rage, it was an act of disposal. I walked out of that house with the silence of someone closing a business deal gone bad. They were still shouting as I reversed out of the driveway, their voices muffled by the soundproof glass of the Range Rover they had defiled. I drove home in silence. There were no tears this time. There was only the hum of the engine and the clarity of a decision already made. When I got to my house, I didn't collapse on the couch. I went straight to my study, woke up my laptop, and opened a spreadsheet. It was time to conduct an audit. For years, I had been the silent infrastructure of their lives, the safety net they didn't even know was there. I started with the recurring expenses. First, the premium subscriptions. Every month, premium packages and delivery services arrived at Derek's apartment, paid for by my accounts because he had once complained about how expensive living was. Click Cancel. Next, the auto repair shop. My credit card was on file as the backup payment method for the family vehicle, a card that had been charged 4 times in the last year for emergencies that were really just routine maintenance my parents couldn't afford. I called the shop and removed my authorization. Deleted. Finally, the joint savings account I had opened with my mother 4 years ago for true emergencies. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal account and closed it. The silence lasted exactly 36 hours. That's how long it took for the first declined transaction to hit. Then the smear campaign began. It started with a vague Instagram story from Derek about heartless people who value possessions over family. Then came the phone calls. My cousin called me worried because my mother had told me I was having a psychological crisis. She told the extended family I was unstable, paranoid, and lashing out at everyone who loved me. They were trying to control the narrative, painting me as the villain so they could remain the victims. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I looked at the 3 of them, these strangers who shared my DNA, and realized the bank wasn't just closed, it was being demolished. Leaving wasn't an act of rage, it was an act of disposal. I walked out of that house with the silence of someone closing a business deal gone bad. They were still shouting as I reversed out of the driveway, their voices muffled by the soundproof glass of the Range Rover they had defiled. I drove home in silence. There were no tears this time. There was only the hum of the engine and the clarity of a decision already made. When I got to my house, I didn't collapse on the couch. I went straight to my study, woke up my laptop, and opened a spreadsheet. It was time to conduct an audit. For years, I had been the silent infrastructure of their lives, the safety net they didn't even know was there. I started with the recurring expenses. First, the premium subscriptions. Every month, premium packages and delivery services arrived at Derek's apartment, paid for by my accounts because he had once complained about how expensive living was. Click Cancel. Next, the auto repair shop. My credit card was on file as the backup payment method for the family vehicle, a card that had been charged 4 times in the last year for emergencies that were really just routine maintenance my parents couldn't afford. I called the shop and removed my authorization. Deleted. Finally, the joint savings account I had opened with my mother 4 years ago for true emergencies. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal account and closed it. The silence lasted exactly 36 hours. That's how long it took for the first declined transaction to hit. Then the smear campaign began. It started with a vague Instagram story from Derek about heartless people who value possessions over family. Then came the phone calls. My cousin called me worried because my mother had told me I was having a psychological crisis. She told the extended family I was unstable, paranoid, and lashing out at everyone who loved me. They were trying to control the narrative, painting me as the villain so they could remain the victims. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I looked at the 3 of them. It all made sense now. The secrecy, the location, the specific insistence on taking my car instead of renting one. They were staging a life for Derek. They were presenting him as the successful, wealthy son who drove a $95,000 SUV while erasing me entirely. To the Caldwells, I didn't exist. I was just the ghost in the machine, the invisible bank account that funded the illusion. In that moment, the nature of my brother's entitlement shifted in my mind. He wasn't just spoiled, he was hollow. This was the golden child phantom, a person so devoid of substance that he required the stolen skins of others to feel real. He needed my car, my money, my stability, because without them, he was just a 28-year-old with no job and a history of bad decisions. They had erased me to build him up. They had cannibalized my success to feed his fantasy. I looked at the card again, at the elegant handwriting, thanking a thief for his hospitality. The anger that had been simmering in my gut turned into something colder, something final. They wanted to play pretend. Fine, I was about to turn the lights on. The next morning, my phone alerted me to a new transaction, not an incoming deposit, but a withdrawal. $850 had been drained from a custodial checking account I had opened with my mother when I was 21 and had long forgotten about. The notification was the final nail in the coffin of my family loyalty. My mother, Linda, desperate to reimburse Madison's family for the towing fees and the rental car costs she couldn't afford because she had spent her retirement playing the big shot, had resorted to theft. She didn't ask, she just took, assuming, as always, that my money was her safety net. I didn't call the bank to dispute it yet. I printed the transaction record. Then I drove to my office. I had barely sat down at my desk when the receptionist buzzed me. "Alexandra, your brother is here. He's agitated." Derek was standing in the lobby wearing aviator sunglasses and looking like a man on the edge of a breakdown. When he saw me, he didn't apologize. He launched straight into the crisis. "You have to help me," he whispered, grabbing my arm. "Madison wants to go to the Keys this weekend. She asked why I'm not driving the Range Rover. I told her it was being serviced, but she wants to pick it up. Alexandra, please, just one more weekend. I just need it for 3 days to keep the story straight until she accepts. Then I'll tell her everything, please." He was begging for the prop back. He needed the costume to keep playing the character he had invented. I analyzed him, taking in the trembling hands and the desperate eyes, seeing the panic of an imposter whose stage was collapsing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "Here," I said. He took it, relief flooding his face. "The keys?" "No," I said. "The receipts." He opened the envelope. Inside was the police report for the stolen car, the towing invoice, and the fresh transaction record showing our mother's theft of $850. I had also included a cease and desist letter drafted by my lawyer regarding any further unauthorized use of my property or funds. "The performance is over, Derek," I said, my voice steady in the quiet lobby. "You don't have a Range Rover, you don't have money, and you don't have a sister who is willing to fund your lies anymore. You can tell Madison the truth, or I will send her this file myself." He stared at me, the color draining from his face as the reality of his situation took hold. The prop was gone, the safety net was gone, he was standing on his own 2 feet for the first time in his life, and he was terrified. I turned around and walked back to my office, leaving him standing there with the evidence of his own fraud in his hands. The fallout was swift and brutal, but it wasn't my burden to carry. When Derek finally told Madison the truth, or rather when he failed to produce the car and the lie unraveled under the weight of his panic, the relationship ended before it even began. The Caldwells, polite but discerning people, quietly distanced themselves from a family that staged wealth like a theater production. My parents were furious, of course. They called me every name in the book, accused me of ruining Derek's life, of being vindictive, of destroying the family. But their voices were faint now, filtered through blocked numbers and ignored voicemails. The extended family, the ones who had seen the receipts, stopped enabling them. For the first time, Linda and Robert had to face the consequences of their entitlement without a safety net to catch them. They were isolated, not because I had turned people against them, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. I changed my phone number 3 weeks later. I hired a detailer to clean my car, stripping away every last grain of sand and every smudge of ice cream until it smelled only of leather and my own fragrance. It was a symbolic baptism, washing away the last traces of their entitlement. Driving home one evening, the sun setting over the Miami skyline, I realized how quiet my life had become. There were no emergency calls demanding money, no guilt trips about missed birthdays, no anxiety about what boundary they would cross next. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. I had spent years trying to buy their love, paying a tax that only increased with inflation. Now, the account was closed. I was the villain in their story, yes, but I was finally the hero in my own. And as I merged onto the highway, putting distance between myself and the people who had tried to erase me, I didn't look back. I just kept driving, safe in the knowledge that the only person in the driver's seat was me. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to keep yourself warm, hit that subscribe button.